the return of the sausages.
We all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Hey, it worked.
Welcome to the Downtown Den Politics podcast for a very special interview with a very special woman. Louise Ellman, or Dame Louise Ellman, as she is now, was the leader of Lancashire County Council from 1981 to 1997, before becoming the MP for Liverpool Riverside up until 2019. Skelmersdale councillor, so obviously somebody that I know very well, and for 8 years, my boss. So welcome to the Downtown Den, Louise. Great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really, really pleased that you've been able to come in, and we've been trying to get this sorted out for some time now. So let's start with this incredible political journey that you've had in your life and go back to how you landed in that new town of Skelmersdale, which obviously for me and you is God's place on earth.
Well, I first went to Skelmersdale because my husband, Jeff, who was a pharmacist, got a job there, setting up a pharmacy in a new estate in Skelmersdale, at that time, Digmore Estate. And we moved to Skelmersdale, and I thought, well, we'll go there for a short time. And it sounded an interesting place, new town, and that's how I arrived there.
And a Manchester girl, yeah?
I'm Manchester girl.
Yeah. So Skelmersdale, very new to you, and lots of people speaking like me, which must have been a shock to the system as a Manc.
It was very interesting because there was the old town of Skelmersdale.
Of course.
And then there was the new town. We were in the new town.
Yeah.
But I'd realised pretty soon after we arrived there was a great division there. There were the people who had been there before, who were then called by the Scousers the Woolly Bag.
Yeah.
And the newcomers were called the Scousers. And there were places where admission was denied. So the Scousers were actually notices on doors, which I found absolutely amazing. But we found that because that we came originally from Manchester, we were okay on both sides. So we were very happy.
That was good. It's a bit of an apartheid going on then, wasn't it?
Well, yes, it was a bit of a shock that I realised what it was, and somehow we were accepted.
Yeah, and it all came together. So by the time we got to around 1970, I guess, you decided to put yourself forward for County Council, Lancashire County Council.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I'd always been interested in politics in a general way, and I'd joined the Labour Party when I was 18. I wanted to change the world. I don't think I've ever given much thought to exactly how this would be done. But there we were in a new town. Lots of things needed doing. Skelmersdale didn't have a library at that time, and it didn't have a college. Didn't have proper transport system. And the current county councillor at that time, who was a guy who I think was in his late 80s, decided he was going to step down from Lancashire County Council. And people asked me, the Labour Party there, would I be interested in putting my name forward? I don't think I knew quite what it was. But I thought, well, it sounds interesting. I was told there were meetings in Preston. I thought, oh, that sounds all right.
Quite exotic.
Put my name forward and got selected.
And then obviously you win the seat. Skelmersdale, very, of course, at that time, much a Labour bastion, really, wasn't it, in terms of all the seats at the district and county level were Labour. And so you trot off to County Hall. How old are you at that time?
I was about 24.
24?
Now, at that time, being a councillor aged 24 was unusual. Being a woman was even more unusual. And one of the most enduring memories I have is that soon after I arrived at County Hall to the meetings there, it was people from a very wide area across Lancashire. One woman called out to me in a meeting, "Go home, young woman." And I can even hear that voice now so many years later. And at first I was a bit shocked, but then I thought, what's this? And it made me dig in. And I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm staying. But I also thought I'd better be careful what I say when people got it in for me before I speak like that. So I think it made me start to research what I did. and think a bit about what I was doing. But it is an enduring memory, that voice, "Go home, young woman."
And at that age, and County Hall, for those who don't know, it's a very traditional building, big imposing council chamber. Did you ever feel as though you had imposter syndrome, or you were quite comfortable in those surroundings?
I felt I was in a strange place. It was something completely different to anything I'd ever seen. Very, very traditional. People who seemed very traditional. I thought everybody was very old. I'm a little more mature myself. Not quite sure if they really were very old, but I was convinced that they were. And they clearly had ways of doing things, which I thought I'd better learn if I was going to be listened to. But one of the other things that I remember from it was that there was a big issue in Skelmersdale about nursery education. There weren't any nurseries there at that time. And the government of the day produced a scheme to set up nurseries in what they call deprived areas. And I wanted for Skelmersdale, more than one for Skelmersdale. And I don't think I thought much about how to go about this, but I just announced that I was going to do this. And the then leader of the Labour group, who was the opposition, it was run by the Conservatives at that time, said to me, "You can't do that. We want nurseries in our areas." And by that he meant the old traditional Lancashire areas, not New Town, because they thought Skelmersdale's a New Town was really a little bit ominous. They didn't quite like it, and they thought it had loads of government money, which really should have gone to them. Well, I was young and determined, and I wasn't interested in that. And when we got into the council chamber, I started to speak in favour of Skelmersdale getting new nurseries under the government scheme. And the leader of the Labour group, to show he was distant from me, actually put up a newspaper in front of him and made sure he could be seen reading it in the council chamber.
Wow.
And that was to show that he didn't support me. But do you know I won? We got the schools, the Skelmersdale, got the nursery schools, and years later, the head of one of them invited me back to show me around the school.
Fantastic.
So that was one of my early experiences.
An early success.
A place I didn't really understand, but I think I learned to get focused on what I was trying to do instead of thinking about where I was.
Yeah.
So that was
incredible.
Success.
And then we sort of have a local government reorganisation in 74. Lots of those old councillors that you've mentioned there disappear to Greater Manchester and other parts of the Northwest, and Lancashire becomes a very different sort of county. And by this point, of course, you're one of the few survivors from that old structure, and you're joined by a whole host of new people. There's a guy who becomes very important in terms of the story of Lancashire County Council and yourself in terms of a political advisor, Jim Mason, who is the leader of the Labour group. And at 1974, so you're still in your 20s, you become deputy leader of the Labour group.
Well, I was amazed. There was a county council election, and county councils were elected for 4 years, so 4 years stint. And I went along. I think at that time still I didn't fully comprehend the political machinations that were going on. And I went to the first meeting after the election, and 80 new people there. There was me and I think one other Labour member from before. This was a meeting of Labour councillors who were the opposition again then because the Conservatives had won. And they'd all organised amongst the Labour members who was going to be the leader of the Labour group, but they hadn't really thought about the deputy. And I think they looked round the room and I was there, and they thought I was continuity from the old regime. Well, they didn't know that really the old regime didn't like me at all. I was seen as a really great nuisance then. So I became the deputy leader. And that actually was a big turning point for me, because that's when I started to really learn how things worked.
Yeah. And then obviously the subsequent election, Jim Mason loses his seat because it's the fag end of a Labour government that was under Jim Callaghan's premiership at the time. You then become the leader of the opposition. And we'll fast forward to 1981, because from having 11 councillors, we have a county council election, and we actually end up with a Labour council at the end of it, which is pretty remarkable, pretty incredible. You're now going to be leader of Lancashire County Council, and I guess that was quite a shock even to you.
Well, during that campaign, I always said, well, we could win. But did I really think that? I don't think so. There were 11 of us out of a county council, came 96. So very small position, but we won, not very much. But it was enough. We won, and we were there. And I was at my own election count. I was representing Skelmersdale. I had my count in Ormskirk. And news kept coming in of Labour gains across Lancashire. And at first I thought, oh, this is nice. I heard it won all the seats in Hyndburn and then in Blackburn. And that was good because there were some Conservative seats in those areas. No. And then last year, Blackpool. Well, that was a game changer. And I thought, oh, something is happening. Well, my first thought went to, could we be winning here? What did I promise we'd do when we wrote that manifesto? I was always quite cautious, so I thought it was probably all right. And then my husband, Jeff, said to me, as we were in Ormskirk, he said, well, I think you're going to win. I think we'd better get to Preston. We said, got in the car, started driving down the M6 to get to Preston, and on the way, we heard we'd actually won.
Fantastic. And that must have been a combination, I suppose, of celebratory mood, but also a little bit of trepidation, because we're still talking about a very young woman here in political terms, 32, 33, something of that ilk, and female. It's unusual for female political leaders at that time. And you've mentioned this big traditional county council, which it was. And of course, the chief executive of that time, who I recall, was a guy called Brian Hill. And if you think about the old-fashioned chief exec, buttoned up three-piece suit, he was the archetype, wasn't he, for that? So how did that relationship sort of develop? Was he a bit frit when you walked in saying, right, we've took control here now, pal?
When I arrived at County Hall, Preston, which was in the early hours by then, and I was greeted by him, standing on the steps, and waiting for me. But I heard afterwards that he had taken a few whiskers to prepare himself for my coming. I think he said afterwards that really it was a good thing and that they wanted change and they knew I'd do interesting things, but I have a feeling it wasn't quite what Brian had thought at the time. So there it was waiting to greet me. And after that, I think I was a leader in a hurry. Yes, I'd been elected in what was a shock win. And I've been elected with a very small majority for 4 years. That was the electoral cycle. And in my mind, I thought, we'll never win this again. That was a Lancashire, very diverse towns like Blackpool, Ironton, Rossendale, but also Fylde and Blackpool area, Newtown, Skelmersdale, Preston, very, very Ribble Valley, very diverse area at that time. And I thought to myself, well, we're here for 4 years. I don't think we can ever come here again. So what can we do to change things better for people in a way that can't be put back? And then I liked on a number of initiatives, major one being to do with employment, where we did a major new initiative, but we did other things as well. So I was a leader in a hurry, and I think I was a bit of a shock in the system. And the officers, who I came to realise actually were very good people, were there to support you. I think at first I thought they were there to stop me. And actually, what we used to end up happening was that the chief executive, Brian Hill, would say to me, you can't do this, you can't do that, it's illegal. And I would say, well, I'm going to do it, really digging in. It's illegal, you can't. And then I'd say, right, well, I'm going to do it. So you show me how I'm going to do it then. So it's not illegal. And he'd go off quite annoyed. And then a few minutes later, his deputy Gordon would come out. I would somehow have some solution. I would modify it only a little bit. I didn't need to learn to modify a bit of my original ideas. I found another way of getting the same thing done that was legal. And then we did it, and we did lots of very innovative things in those years. And of course, I was quite wrong in thinking we'd never win again. We kept winning, never by a lot, but we kept winning county council elections. And I remained a leader until I left Lancashire in 1997.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first time Labour had took control of Lancashire County Council in 81. And then, as you say, right through your period of leadership, 16 years, you basically kept control of the council, which was an incredible achievement in itself. But let's go back to those innovative ideas. And I look back at the time of your leadership at Lancashire, and you look in bewilderment, in a sense, at some of the innovations that you introduced. And pioneering is an understatement, in a sense. So let's start with Lancashire Enterprises. This is an economic development arm of the county council that was going to create jobs, support business. The first step, I think, that you saw a Labour council take to create public-private sector partnerships, which everybody just takes for granted now, but very unique at the time. And of course, all this stuff that you're doing, which is private money and creating jobs and supporting employment, you think that would be music to the ears of any government. But Mrs. Thatcher wasn't too pleased with you, was she?
No, Mrs. Thatcher didn't like us at all. I don't think she liked Lancashire being Labour. I don't think she liked local authorities being involved in business. And when we were successful, I thought she liked it even less. A Labour local authority successful in business. And she didn't like it. In fact, she tried to close us down. And you are right in what you said, Trent. What we did was innovative. And we were pioneers of public-private sector partnerships. And we did that by creating a new economic development agency, Lancashire Enterprises, which was connected to Lancashire County Council and accountable to it, but operated independently so it could attract staff who knew about business, who knew about commerce. And that's how we attracted a lot of private sector finance. And we were also the first authority to set up in Brussels. We had an office in Brussels, and we developed very close ties to the European Commission, and we knew how things worked. And again, that's what I learned at that time. No good just having slogans. You have to know how things work, know how you can deliver. And what Lancashire at that stage was identified as an objective 2 area in Europe. And that meant that we weren't seen as an area with intense poverty, but we were seen as an area that was facing challenges. But to get that status, you had to win a case, put that case together. We had connections with the Commission, and we found a way that we could deliver funding for projects in Lancashire that made people's lives better. It's employment. It could be very small companies, startups that gave people a chance, going right through to when we saved Leyland Trucks in Lancashire. We saved thousands of jobs in the factory itself, but also in the feeder factories that made components and furnishings for the vehicles in Lancashire and throughout up the northwest. So we were pioneers. Mrs. Thatcher didn't like us. She brought in new legislation to try and shut us down. The new legislation said that whatever funding we raised, even if it was from the private sector, would count against local authority financing. And that meant she was trying to say to us, well, if you carry on with this economic development company, you're going to have to choose between money for jobs, for employment, and money for schools. And she knew people we represented might not like that. But we restructured, found a way around that, and we made ourselves work in a slightly different manner, a bit more distant from the county council, still connected, but not the same. And that way we carried on pretty much as before.
Yeah, as I say, an incredible initiative at the time. People now would go, well, public-private sector partnerships. We're talking about the early 80s, and we're talking about a Labour Party that was seen as very left-wing at that time. Michael Foot was leader now. You know, we'd had the years, as I say, of Callaghan. So for a Labour council to be taking that approach would have been seen in itself as quite unique. And as well as opposition from Mrs. Thatcher, did you have some internal opponents as well? Labour councillors who were saying, what the bloody hell are we doing working with business?
Yeah, we had all sorts of oppositions. In a general political sense, there were people on the Conservative side, also general right-wing circles, who said, this is terrible, it's backdoor nationalisation. Shouldn't be doing it. And then on the left, they had people saying to us, you shouldn't be doing this, you're stopping the revolution. They had some idea that things should stay bad and then there'd be some kind of socialist revolution. So it was on all sides, and even some Labour councillors who said, well, what's this? Is this money going there? And maybe we'd rather have it for schools. But of course, a lot of the money we got was raised from other sources. It wasn't available for schools. We raised money from Europe. We raised money from the private sector. It was different money that was there. And yes, we did need public money to start things off. But on the back of that, we raised more. But what happened was what I suspect was always going to happen. I used to say to people at the beginning, when we had all this opposition, I said, well, I think that once we start to show what this is all about, people's ideas will change. And indeed they did. Because people then saw that we helped to save local companies that were in trouble. We set up some cooperatives. We saved Leyland Trucks. We worked with British Aerospace, who were having some problems at the time. We did major regeneration schemes in Rossendale and in Whitecross Estate in Lancaster, in Leyland, which is still there. Yes. And we also developed training initiatives. We helped to train and retrain people to keep their jobs and to bring new jobs. And when we started to deliver those things and people could see what we were talking about for themselves, attitudes changed very quickly. And after a time, everybody it was all very easy, which of course it wasn't. There were always challenges. And people's ideas changed. And again, I think I realised then that you can explain what you're going to do to people, but it can sound very complex and very hypothetical. But once you've got concrete examples of what you're talking about, people understand much better what you're saying.
I think the other thing that came about as a result of the Lancashire enterprise model that you introduced, and certainly through the work you did in Brussels. And let me just also go back to that initiative, because I remember there was a lot of criticism about a council buying a building in Brussels. And of course, we ended up making a load of money on it because every other local authority in the Northwest paid us rent for subletting the building.
Well, that's right. I mean, two things happened. One was in the building that we had out itself, that yes, once we were doing this and successfully bringing millions of pounds into Lancashire for business, other councils thought, well, this is a good idea, and thought they'd be connected with it, and that the building filled up. But by being in Brussels, it meant that the people who worked for Lancashire enterprises could build up a European base. And that was vitally important. They knew how the system worked. They knew the commission. They knew how to get funding for Lancashire businesses. And we even started to develop European programs. For example, Blackpool at the time was having a lot of financial problems, economic problems. It had been a very successful seaside place. And we wanted to get some funding in to develop alternatives in Blackpool. And we were told by the commissioners, well, we can't do anything just for Blackpool on its own. But if we could set up a network of, let us say, European seaside resorts in decline, then under that heading, some funding could go to Blackpool and Morecambe, as we were looking at Morecambe as well. So we then took the lead in setting up a European network of seaside resorts in decline, which Blackpool was one. Under that heading, the European Commission allocated funding, and then under that, we applied for appropriate funding for Blackpool, which we got.
Yeah.
And we did that, again, for British Aerospace in a slightly different way. So it was about, yes, getting the best from the funds that were already there, but it was about innovating and finding out new ways
creating new funds.
Yeah. And that could only be done by people having a close connection with how Europe worked. And again, it's not about just a concept, oh, we'll go to Europe, they've got the money. It's what's available, how does it work, who decides, how is that money put there, how do you have to be eligible to get it, what do you have to do? So it's building up a whole network, an expert knowledge. And within Lancashire Enterprises, we had people who did have that knowledge, did have the connections, and that's how we managed to get the funding over to the benefit of Lancashire residents and the Lancashire economy. Because I knew too that if Lancashire was going to be successful, and there was mass unemployment in Lancashire in the early 1980s, and I have to go back to that time, not now.
Yeah.
And yes, we provided local government services the best we could in difficult circumstances, but you had to have an economy that worked and jobs. People would languish or would leave to where the jobs were. So an economy and jobs was important, and that's why this work was important.
Yeah, as I say, it was just incredible when you think about that time, and for that sort of initiative to come forward from a Labour council. But it wasn't the only thing that you did that was innovative. So now again, we all talk about net zero, sustainability, the green agenda as it's a mainstream conversation. Lancashire County Council were the first local authority to do a major piece of work, and we created this thing called the Green Audit.
Yes, we did. And we created the Green Audit Lancashire. I still keep a copy of it on my shelf. And it was the first time a local authority undertook that kind of detailed work. And again, we tried to do things properly, not just statements of what we thought should be. We tried to do the work. And it had a very detailed analysis of Lancashire, how its land use, its water use, how things were organised, what the issues were, what the problems were. And it was a very important document as a base to develop our work. And then one of the further initiatives we took was to do with dealing with sewage and water, trying to have clean water. And the water authority at that time was North West Water. That was before United Utilities was set up. And we found they had a proposal which really meant dumping untreated sewage in the sea near Blackpool, on the Fylde coast. And the water company wanted to come to make a great presentation, to a very glossy presentation, how great their scheme was. But I'd found out through contacts with specialists in the area, we'd found through our work on the Green Audit, that what North West Water was saying was not a good scheme at all. It was basically untreated sewage. And we embarked on a very big campaign. And Europe were involved with that too, because the proposed scheme was going to break one of the European directives on clean water. We had a massive campaign on that, and in the end, we won. And North West Water had to do a proper scheme. Now, I'm sad to say this seems to have slipped back recently, so I think there's need time for a new initiative. But we did manage to bring change there to make things better for Lancashire.
And of course, what you also did through that Green Audit was the evidence of global warming, which again, as I say, that time wasn't a particular debate or discussion that was happening. And I remember the detail in that work that had been undertaken, and you launching that Green Audit and thinking at the time, wow, this is, well, it was at least 10 years ahead of its game, really.
Yes, it was. And you're right, it spoke about global warming. I don't think that was a phrase.
Wasn't even a thing then.
In those days.
No.
It looked in detail, but it looked overall as well. And it pointed out what was going on. And I think at the time, people just weren't expecting that.
No.
And I don't think outside of Lancashire, people quite knew what to do with it. It was all new, but it was there. And it was all laid down.
Well, it was being quoted by the Labour government in 2005 at a conference I went to, so it obviously did have an impact, and it was used as a baseline, I think, for work that was done in future years. So we talked about jobs, employment, obviously your passion, economic development, and then the Green Audit and the work that you've done in Europe. But I think the other thing I'd say that Louise Ellman was ahead of her time on was using the press. And the word spin doctor came into fashion at about 94, 95. Ellman had been doing that since 1981 at least. You were hugely, as a local government leader, high profile. You were always in there. You're in the paper more than fish and chips, as my mum and dad would say. You had great relationship with journalists in regional news and television. And you had a media unit within the county council, which again I think was fairly unique at the time. Tell me what your thinking behind that was.
Yeah, I realised early on that if we wanted to stay in Lancashire and continue the work we were doing, clearly we have to be elected. And Lancashire at that stage wasn't really seen as a very strong entity in itself in terms of news. There wasn't anything that covered Lancashire. And I thought, well, we can do all the good stuff we like. Less people know what we're doing. They're not going to vote us back in because they simply will not know what we've done. And so I set about creating a news outlet, news media, that where we could promote what we were actually doing. And that's really how it came about. And in some areas, we actually recruited journalists on local newspapers who came to work for us, who knew how it was working and knew how to do it. And then there was also how you portrayed yourself. I felt too that people had to have a focus before they'd listen. And so I thought, well, I'm the leader of the council, so I'll try and promote these things. And maybe people can then identify with me as the leader of Lancashire. They would think that Lancashire is doing these things and understand where things came from. Because I've realised in politics more generally, a lot of good things can be done, but people don't necessarily connect them with the council or the government that actually delivered them. So they say things like, oh, we elect these people locally, nationally, and they do nothing for us or a waste of time. And if you then point out what they've actually delivered, which they like, they say, oh, yeah, that's good. Oh, yeah, that's good. But they don't have no concept it's to do with a local authority or a government. So I thought, I tried to make that connection. And so that's how it started. And then I learned some lessons too from journalism, because I used to think I could write press releases. And I used to have an idea you had to explain this and you had to explain that. And I'd write things. And certainly one of the journalists that we employ, I remember, I looked at something I'd written, put a line straight through it. And I said, oh. And they said, no, this isn't the way you do it. Send out press releases, yes, but people read the first line, second line, they might read the last line, the rest, no, say, nothing wrong, there isn't anything wrong in the rest, because someone will look at it. But if you want to get impact, your story has to be at the beginning and at the end, and nobody explaining this, that, and the other. Tell them what you've done in our life. And so, although I didn't like being turned off, I must tell you, I got over it. And I learned how to do it. And then I realised too that the local media, and I was dealing with local media then, wanted news stories. So they didn't want someone pontificating that what should be, what shouldn't be. They want to know what you've done. What have you done? So as we were delivering jobs, looking at environmental issues, delivering welfare benefits, which is another area, unless you tell people you're doing it, the public have no idea at all. And so, again, concentrating on what you're doing, not your opinion about this, that, and the other.
Yeah. No, you were brilliant in terms of being able to spot a story, get the photo opportunity where appropriate. And I remember by the time I got onto the county council, which was 89, I remember being sat at the back of committee meetings, and you always sat at the end because you may have been called out to do something. And the press team had come up with the press release, and you were the one with the red pen. We're not saying this, we're not saying, you'd be scribbling stuff out and writing stuff in. So you ended up as the biter bitten, so to speak. You're writing your own press releases in the end, weren't you?
Well, I've learned. And that's another element I think if you're in politics, maybe for anything, you should never think you know it all. You've always got something to learn. And certainly in political life, even if you know what to do, unless you have a way of explaining to the public what you're doing, it'll still be a good thing to do, but they won't give you any benefit for it.
You're not getting the credit.
They don't have any idea at all.
Yeah. You mentioned welfare benefits there. And again, just to explain to listeners and viewers, welfare rights advice services, few and far between. In the 80s, Lancashire County Council, one of the early adopters, and in the end was seen as the best welfare rights service in the country, won lots of awards and lots of plaudits from people right across the political spectrum, actually. It was, again, one of those projects that was set up that was initially criticised by the Conservatives, and then in the end they were very supportive of it. But this is obviously very important to me in terms of my own political journey, because I get onto the council, as I mentioned, in 1989. We'd won a majority of one seat by this time, 89, so very exciting. And you may recall the one seat we won was Ormskirk by 4 votes. So talk about a tight election. So I comes into County Hall. I have to say, I probably a bit like you, found it a bit old-fashioned, a bit stuffy, but was excited because it did have that sort of dynamic culture about the place then, and that was probably something over 8 years you'd introduced. So I couldn't wait to get started. But then thankfully, you and I knew each other, of course, because I was a fellow Skelmersdale councillor, and you gave me a job of heading that welfare rights service. So thank you very much. But more importantly, it was hugely important to the people of the county because it was supporting people who clearly needed help most. But that point you made earlier, we generated about £3 million worth of new benefits for people. Of course, where are they spending that money? In the Lancashire economy. So I think everything that you were thinking about and doing, there was an economic thread to an awful lot of it, Louise, wasn't there?
Yes, there was, because I knew that the economy was very, very important for everyone. And on the welfare rights issue, we were doing a number of things at once. And Frank, you were marvellous in that. It was a great appointment because you had the flair and you had the knowledge and you had the interest to be in charge of that welfare rights department. And again, we were innovating.
Yeah.
This was not done at that time. And there was lots of poverty in Lancashire, mass unemployment, a lot of poverty amongst a whole range of people. And at that stage, the government of the day had actually instructed what were then the employment officers, the Department of Employment then, not to give anybody advice on how to get benefits. So people would become unemployed or have other problems and would simply not know how to get what were their legal rights. And so there was a massive gap there. So by setting this up, we could promote people in their knowledge of their rights, but equally importantly, help them as individuals to claim what they were entitled to. And so, again, yes, it was about people's rights and alleviating poverty. But I realised that by giving people more money, cash in their hands, which was theirs by right, they would spend it locally and help local businesses. That's what it was all about. But what we did was, under your leadership, was not just to talk about this again, but we actually set up centres. I think that you and your staff actually went to local community centres and held advice sessions and not just told people about benefits, actually helped them to fill the forms. And always very difficult thing for people to do, and actually delivered money. So it was a really terrific service, innovating and helping people individually and also helping Lancashire.
Yeah, and as I say, a great introduction for me into the county council, so thank you. Everybody, bloody hell. That fella, Louise Ellman, favours him, she favours him. So we'll come to this now, actually, because, as I say, you and I got to know each other through the Skelmersdale Labour Party. I was watching from afar some of these great things that were happening. And, I was 26 when I got elected, so much older than you were. You were only 24. And come 89, I sort of get onto the council, Louise as leader, and I walk into County Hall and you've got these 50-odd Labour councillors who are like scared stiff of you, Louise, right? And I'm looking at this thinking, well, why is she making all these people so frightened of her? What's happening? And, I say this obviously half joking, but on a serious note, there was the Ellman look, the Ellman stare. And from the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats and within our own group, if Louise Ellman stood up and gave a particular look, it was like you knew you were in trouble. You didn't want to get that look. Were you aware of that? Or was this something that you just being yourself, cracking on with the job, and you weren't too bothered about what other people were thinking?
Well, I heard later about this look. Even recently, somebody said to me something about the look. I didn't realise that. That sounded to more fun. I didn't realise that. But I think I did consciously think it mattered to have control of the situation, have discipline.
Yep.
Because I saw what was happening in other local authorities at that time. Sometimes there were people in the local authority and some wanted to do one thing, some wanted to do another. This is in the governing party.
Yeah.
Clearly, I've never influenced over the opposition. We were in charge and we'd worked hard for that, and I wasn't going to let go of it. And I wanted to deliver. And my political instincts tell me, if you have a lot of division in your own group, and people can express views, and everyone benefits from listening to different ideas. But if you have people who think that they can change what you want to do, or have splinter groups voting against their own groups. That's the way it goes wrong, and things break up and it doesn't work properly. So I think I had a concept of all that, and I went to what I thought was discipline. So I think we discussed things well, and we used to have a liaison group with the local Labour Party as well, which we call the policy subcommittee, where issues were discussed with local members and with councillors, and then we decided what we were going to do, and we did it. And I saw it as my responsibility as leader to get things done. And I know some people thought I was too tough, they would say, oh, maybe it's a look they didn't like. But I think, again, if I go back to when I was first elected, maybe I was a leader in a hurry, and I thought, we've got to fight for this to win. And unless we do what we say we're going to do and we get it done and deliver it, and I can explain it, maybe we won't be here to do any more. So I was very, very focused on it. And there was another issue as well at the time. There were a lot of problems in the Labour Party at that time, particularly in this part of the world, part of the world I was in. Not necessarily Lancashire, but outside of Lancashire in the northwest. And there was a group called the Militant Tendency, which in fact in the end took over Liverpool City Council with, in the end, disastrous results. And I knew that there were people within Labour groups who were trying to undermine the groups from the Militant Tendency, trying to talk in a different way and pretend you could change the world very quickly if only you did this, that and the other. And I'd experienced some of that on the sale, and I knew about it in Liverpool. Yeah. So I think that was in my mind as well. And I think I was always looking out for somebody who might want to sow division. And so maybe some people thought unfairly, if I thought I'd seen that starting, I thought I'm going to stop this before it developed. So maybe sometimes I was unfair on one or two people and stopped them because I thought it might lead to that. But I wanted a disciplined group where we took decisions and then implemented.
And it worked, because during that period when, as I say, we had a majority of one, we never lost a vote. So testament to...
We're tight, yeah.
I
mean, we had a majority of one in that year, and then there was a time when we were the biggest party, and we didn't actually have an overall majority, but we were the biggest party. And by then, I managed and again in those years, we still delivered things, but I learned then I had to... maybe be a bit nicer and use different words, words where I could get support from others. And mainly it was the Liberals, there weren't Liberal Democrats at that time, who tended to go along with us. But I had to put things a certain way. And I kind of knew the things I would never get agreement on, kept a bit away from those. And sometimes during those years, I think the chief executive, again, Brian Hill at that time, and then Gordon Johnson after him, got a bit upset with me, because one of the things I found did work was that sometimes if some of the opposition councillors, it was Liberals really that did this, had maybe something they wanted doing for their constituents, and I might bend a bit and let it happen. And then for other things, nothing was ever said. Just happened. And of course, the bill went up a bit, and I'd be told, you're spending more than you said you would. Never answered it. Things carried on. Then we on again. Then after we saved Leyland trucks, I think that we had a lot more support. But we never had a big majority. No. So we were always very focused and always had to think about what we were doing and projecting what we were doing as well.
And I think that, as I say, you were leader for 16 years, so that's no mean feat in any Labour group in any part of the country. But there was an issue that you'd sort of dug your heels into, and this is why I sort of learned about your fierce reputation, even with the people you were very friendly towards. So we're having this conversation. There was an idea, basically, that you used to chair the council and the group, and there was an idea to basically give somebody else a chance of a sort of opportunity to chair the group, and you were not too happy about this because, as you say, you wanted to have that iron grip and you wanted to maintain that control. But there was a lot of sort of people within the group at this time saying, well, we've behaved ourselves for 12 years. We've never done anything that she should be upset about. And I was talking to people like Jim Mason, who was very close to his political advisor, David Nelson, who was the whip. And it was clear that the group were agitating for this change. And I said, well, just go and tell Louise that we're going to have to bite the bullet and make the change. And David Nelson, who was a fierce chief whip, you will recall, and Jim Mason was no shrinking violet, looked at me and said, well, you can go and tell her then. And at that point, I thought, you've basically supping from the poisoned chalice here. But, you know, we had a nice chat, didn't we? And the change was implemented, and it was your idea in the end. That's the way we sold it, wasn't it?
Well, you know, Frank, until now, I didn't even know about that conversation. It happened with my friends, and they were my friends, so we spoke about all sorts of things. And yes, I think it was part of my idea of being in control. And I do remember you said to me, you know, you're going to have to change this. And at that time, I think I got the message. I thought, better do it. So I agreed to it. I didn't really want. I really didn't want to. Frankly, I didn't want to. But I felt I had a feeling, you know, I better have. And actually, it was a good decision.
It worked, didn't it?
The person that then chaired the group meetings was a councillor called John Entwistle from Burnley.
Yeah, it was great.
Who was a great guy who, as you see, I was always thinking of people who wanted to stop me doing things.
Yeah.
And he was calm and he made sure things were not rushed through. But he wanted things done properly. He didn't want trouble that was very disruptive and problematic. Wanted people to have a say and to feel they'd had a say as well, but to things to run. And it did work. So I have to admit now, Frank, for so many years, that you were right. It was the right decision.
Well, I think it was the right decision. And I think, I mean, again, in fairness to you, I think the fact that the message was well received and you knew it was coming from a good place, you knew I wasn't trying to create any trouble, that certainly helped sell that particular issue. But the other thing, of course, that you've managed to do at this point is that, and again, for people looking at politics now, and the cities of Manchester in particular, Liverpool as well, but also Leeds, Birmingham, you know, these are seen as the big conurbations, the big players in terms of economic drive, economic development. Lancashire was the kingpin of the Northwest. And this was partly as a result of all those great things that you were doing at County Hall, but also you'd been one of the key figures in establishing the Northwest Regional Association, again, well ahead of its time. And this brought all the local authorities from across the region together, partly as a result, of course, of those economic opportunities that existed, but also in your head, I think, an opportunity to start to promote devolution.
Yes, you're quite right. I realised that the North were missing out. And that although we did good things, that big investment funds, whether it was in science investments, in the universities, in transport, in other areas, went down south. And it went disproportionately down south because that's where the power was. That's where people connected themselves, and then success built on success. And we kept losing out. And I came to the view, and I mean, others persuaded me to do it because I wasn't aware of that till then, is until and I thought it had to be Northwest, a bigger area than where I was, had enough power, economic, political power to register what we needed, what investment we wanted, things would never really change. And there were also a lot of what we call quangos, organisations that actually operated across the Northwest, but were unaccountable. And they needed to have some accountability brought to them. And so, yes, I did want to have an elected Northwest Assembly. And when we set up Lancashire Enterprises, that was done as a Lancashire Economic Development Agency. We were able to do that. I had the power to do that. But really, I wanted a Northwest Development Agency as well. And I thought, and the people I was working with thought, that maybe if we had a Labour government in the future, we could persuade them to set up economic development agencies in the regions. And it wasn't a done deal because there were always people, particularly those who looked towards the south, that thought they would lose power and they didn't want it. But we thought it could be done. And indeed, that is what happened. Northwest Development Agency was set up, had terrific successes, then unfortunately was disbanded by the coalition government because the Conservatives didn't like it and the Liberals weren't strong enough to keep it going. It went. But my concept was for more than economic development. It was from an elected Northwest Assembly as well. And although the Labour Party had said they were interested in that, I don't think they were ever really committed to it. And John Prescott was, worked with him, and Dick Caborn, who then was a Sheffield MP. But again, there were other people in the Labour Party had other ideas and didn't want it. And in the end, we got quite close to it, but then it didn't happen.
Yeah, it was a shame. It was a shame. And the debate's still going on now, of course, with devolution and regional mayors and so on. But I still think you're right in that although we do have more devolution now and the city regional mayors have some power, what you envisaged would have been far greater than that. Was probably more akin to what you've got in Scotland.
Yes, it was, because that had power in it.
Yeah.
And it has.
Yeah. And money.
It's able money. It's able to do things.
Yeah.
I mean, my idea in all of this was to have things where, yes, you discuss what you want to do, but then you can do it. You can actually make a difference. And when we first set up that Northwest Regional Association, which was the first time we brought people together across the Northwest, I saw the appetite for these things because it wasn't a local authority matter at all. Business was very keen. Yeah. The universities.
Again, you brought businesses into that association,
Environmentalists came into it. And a whole range of campaigners came into it. There was a hunger for it. People wanted to be in that wider entity. And I think we did some good things. We've produced some good papers which had an influence, but it's not the same as a body that can actually make things happen. Influential, but not enough if you don't have that.
I have to say, they made a great Prime Minister for the Northwest, that's for sure, which would have been a great job for you, I'm sure. Well, listen, we're going to take a short break because all good things have to come to an end. And after 16 years, Louise Ellman decides it's time for her to pack her bags in West Lancashire and head off to Westminster via Liverpool. So when we come back, we'll be talking about Louise's parliamentary career. Stay with us. Come back to the Downtown Den in a mo. Welcome back to the second part of this very special Downtown Den Politics podcast. Me, Frank McKenna, joined by Dame Louise Ellman. So, Louise, we've been talking about that incredible career that you enjoyed at Lancashire County Council, all the great things that you did. And as I said, you came to 16 years as leader, and you've been on the council obviously since 1970, so even longer than that, 27 years a Lancashire County Councillor. And you decide that you're going to go off to Parliament, and obviously that then creates a vacancy at County Hall, leadership there. And to this day, I still shake my head in shock and awe that you decided that I was going to take a role as deputy leader. So just for my own personal, nobody might be interested in this other than me. What made you make that decision? You thought I was ready to step up to that position?
I thought you were good.
No, thank you.
And you could do it, and I thought you knew what you were doing. You were committed to it. You had ideas, and you had flair. And I think it's not only about being able to do things in some mechanical way, understanding. You've got to have more than that. And I thought you had flair and commitment and bring something different to it.
Well, thank you.
And I thought you'd more than proved your worth in how you dealt with welfare rights, how you built that department up, made it a major part of Lancashire, made it really important. And I thought you could do it. You had the flair and the commitment.
Well, thank you very much. And it was a great opportunity. Obviously, I was delighted to get your support because that was a shoo-in then for me in terms of the deputy leadership. And I thoroughly enjoyed the role. And you were obviously a first-class mentor for me, so I learned from the best. And one quick story, and you've sort of mentioned this in the first part of the podcast, but the piece of advice you gave me was the officers will tell you there's certain things you can't do. You tell them to go and find a way in which you can. And within 6 weeks, a conversation of that ilk was taking place with Gordon Johnson, who was the deputy chief exec, whilst you were leading, had become the chief executive by this time. And I says this line to him, go and find me a way to do it then, Gordon. And he drops his specs and looks over his glasses and says to me, Mrs. Ellman told you to say that, didn't he? So your reputation You may have gone, but your reputation was certainly still.
Glad you followed that up, because that really is the way. And sometimes you have to modify a bit on what you started on.
Yeah.
But you basically don't get what you want.
As long as you get things done.
How you thought, but you get things done.
Yeah, for sure. So you decided, as I say, in 1997, that a bit earlier than that, obviously, to seek a seat, and Liverpool Riverside is where you end up, a very safe Labour seat, of course. Tell us about how that came about.
Well, I never actually wanted to be an MP.
Okay.
And when I was in Lancashire, which I loved doing, I really loved being leader in Lancashire.
Yeah.
I did meet different MPs, different capacities, and I didn't like them very much. I thought they were arrogant people. And sometimes when I went on delegations to London to meet MPs, I found it dismissive. It was a whole day's event for me to get there, be at a meeting. They'd come into something, say a few words, go out again. At home in Lancashire, there were MPs who used to try and tell me what I should be doing. And I gave them a short shrift. I wasn't listening to that. I reckon I knew more about Lancashire than they knew. I didn't care what the Labour Party nationally thought about me. I did what I thought was right in Lancashire. I wanted to be an MP. And what happened was I was approached, actually, by a trade union leader who I'd worked with across the Northwest in all the regional work I'd done, who said there was going to be a vacancy in Liverpool Riverside. Bob Parry, who was the MP at the time, was going to retire. And was I interested? And I thought a bit. And at first I thought, well, I like them doing. And then I thought, well, I don't know. I've been leader for 16 years, and maybe I'm starting to run out of steam a bit. I should do something else.
I don't think we ever felt that, to be fair.
If it had been a regional government, I would have definitely gone for that.
Yeah.
But there wasn't. And so I was really mixed thoughts. Said, okay, I've hat in the ring. And that was the beginning of All Women Shortlist. I think that was the first one.
Yeah.
But I hadn't even thought much about that at all. So I let my name go forward. Didn't really do anything about it. I didn't do canvassing. I realised later that the other people did intense canvassing of the local Labour members. I didn't do very much at all. I was also a member of the Cooperative Party, so I'm still out. So I was a Labour cooperative candidate, and I think that the co-op members did some work as well on my behalf. And I came to meetings when I was invited to go, but I didn't really do much. I found afterwards other candidates were inviting members of the Labour Party to homes with afternoon tea and all sorts of things to get in with them. Because I liked the idea of Liverpool, because in the work I'd done in the Northwest, I liked Liverpool. And of course, Skelmersdale, yes, Liverpool people. I liked Liverpool people. And I'd also registered that across the Northwest, Liverpool was looked down on. I didn't like that at all. It was seen as a bit of a crazy place where maybe people made good jokes, but basically trouble them, keep away from it. And I liked Liverpool, and I thought Liverpool wasn't a bad place in terms of the city at that time, its economy, its politics at that time. But, it could do great things. And so I was drawn to it in that way, and I knew a bit about it. And when it came to the actual selection meeting, where every member has a vote, and what I now think happened was that there was a local candidate who was assumed she'd win it because she'd been there. I think she'd been a councillor, she'd been known. Because what happens is when you've been somewhere for a long time, you certainly have your supporters, but you have people who don't like you. Remember all kinds of slights they reckon you've done or they think you've done to them, and they're not going to have you. And the local candidate had her supporters, certainly, but she was associated with some of the politics of Liverpool. Liverpool was now moving away from, wanted to become more centrist. And a body of opinion was getting up thinking who could be an alternative. And because I'd been leader of Lancashire, I'd been on the Northwest media quite a lot. So people there did know about me, they knew about me. And I think a lot of people there started to think that I was a credible alternative. And things were changing in Liverpool. It was coming out of the Millicent era, the more extreme areas. And I think they wanted somebody that they felt could deliver. They wanted things done, the things that happened. And in the end, it was a tight vote. I think there were 3 rounds of voting. but I came through it, and I was selected, and that is how it happened. And of course, then of course, once I got involved, I did like what I was doing, and I remained there for several further elections.
Yeah.
And hoped that I was able to help to change Liverpool, be a much more successful place, which it is now.
Yeah.
So I liked it, but it wasn't that I wanted to be an MP. And when I was in Parliament, I realised there were lots of MPs who for years had wanted to be an MP and they'd looked for where they could become an MP and certainly gave good service where they were, but they wanted to be an MP. But to me, I didn't like MPs I knew. I was meant to be an MP. I liked Liverpool, yes. And I was pleased I was selected, and I then focused on the job to be done in Liverpool Riverside.
So let's go back to then. So it's 97, and obviously Labour have been out of power there nationally for 18 years. You, of course, unusually for a Labour politician, have got lots of experience of having power and delivering things. Tony Blair, new Prime Minister, you had met over that period of time as when you've been the leader of Lancashire County Council, lots of those new cabinet ministers, people like John Prescott, Dick Cabourn was a junior minister, David Blunkett, I remember him coming to Lancashire quite often. And I thought that when you were in Westminster, given the fact that it was a new government, inexperienced for obvious reasons, 18 years in opposition, that you will get a junior ministership. And that didn't happen. And I don't know whether you were disappointed or whether that wasn't your expectation, but it was certainly mine. It was a surprise to me. And I just wonder, going from a position at County Hall where you literally were the master or the mistress of all you surveyed, going into that Palace of Westminster where I'd worked for 7 years as a parliamentary advisor, of course. What differences did you spot? And, negatives and positives, I suppose.
It was a massive difference. And I went from being in charge of the major local authority for 16 years.
The biggest in the country.
Biggest authority in the country, where you could decide what we did. I could summon officers, make it happen. And I was about doing things. And then suddenly I was in the Parliament, one of many. Labour won from the magnificent way.
It's a landslide, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was in a photograph called Blair's Babes.
Yeah.
I must say, I was a mature babe. And there were lots of people there. And suddenly, instead of being the youngest, I was actually one of the oldest. And there were lots of people there who'd been around for some time, had all kinds of contacts. I'd never worked on making contacts. I was just interested in what I was doing, and I built that up. And I was old rather than young, that's how I think it was seen. And I also think that there were perhaps people in there with some scores to settle, perhaps some influential MPs in there who I had crossed in my time as leader of Lancashire. Because when I was in Lancashire, I didn't really care what anyone in Parliament thought. I was doing what I thought was best, and that was it. And so, no, I wasn't made a minister. I never thought I would be, because I think I was aware of perhaps some political enemies I'd made, but there were lots of other people around. There were lots of young people who had connections in all kinds of ways, and I was just focused on doing the job. And the first thing I did is really massive loss of power. I couldn't do things. I could talk about things, and in fact, being in Parliament gives you a platform that you can't get any other way. And if you want to raise issues, national issues, international issues, you can do it from there. You can make speeches that can be reported, and you can have a campaign. And it's different. But I was into making things happen on the ground. And yes, I was doing it as part of a new Labour government. And so all the great things the Labour government of that time did, like introducing a minimum wage, which didn't exist until that Labour government. Free travel on the buses, that didn't exist till then. Grants for women returners to education, apart from what we did in Lancashire, that didn't exist till then. So there are all kinds of things I was doing. Regional Development Agency, that's that was argued for. That might have gone by the by, but it didn't. So I was part of making things happen as part of a Labour government. But in terms of saying, I want this done here, come in and do it, I think gone. So it was a complete change. And I had to find other ways of working. And I had to find different ways of doing things. And there were national things, but there were also local things in Liverpool. And I wanted to use the knowledge I had on regeneration to help to rebuild Liverpool. Because again, going back to the economy, Liverpool was just coming out of a very bad place where the economy was dreadful, big unemployment, and people who could get jobs were leaving Liverpool. More people were leaving than were coming. That had been the position for years. And Liverpool was basically in trouble. And politically it was as well. And local government-wise, it wasn't working very well. There were a lot of big problems. So I wanted to use the knowledge I had to change it. But I had to do it a different way than I'd done it in Lancashire. I didn't have any power to do it. I couldn't summon people together and say what we will do because they wouldn't have listened to me. They wouldn't listen to anybody. It wouldn't have happened. So I tried to work through government to bring directed funds to Liverpool that would invest in the things that matter. And so there was a new organisation set up to develop Liverpool City Centre with government money, and I was on the board of that and helped to direct that. And once the North West Regional Development Agency was set up, which I was part of doing that in Parliament, I then worked with the people who were actually running that, who I knew from my Lancashire days, to bring investment into Liverpool. So a lot of things then happened in Liverpool because of that. I tried to give people from outside a different impression of Liverpool because I found that Liverpool's reputation outside of here was really very bad. And people in government circles, including Labour people, was that, just be careful. You keep away from there, it's trouble. And so I wanted to change the image of Liverpool. So I tried to talk Liverpool up in public and in private so that they weren't afraid of it. They thought things would work. And I think that tried to help things. And so that was the way I did a lot of local work as well with individual people, constituency work, but nationally. But one of the big things I was able to do, which I think led the way to a lot of investment here, was to take on a big developer who was actually holding back Liverpool's development. And the company that was set up to run the city centre to do major developments, it was held back because one developer was sitting on two very important pieces of land property in the city centre. I tried to do something about that, and then I started to get information from a whistleblower who sent me information which suggested that this developer had received money under a government scheme that went back a number of years and was not using the money for the purpose for which it was intended, and intended to continue sitting on these sites so it could at some point be worth a lot more money. Do it, but it was holding Liverpool back. So I raised this in Parliament, and I used the laws which protect you from libel. You're able to say things if you believe they're true, but you can't be sued for them. And I only said that I believed to be true, but I felt free to speak. And I had information from somebody I trusted. And the government then set up an investigation into the situation. And the investigation, it concluded that things that were wrong were going on. And the government said that they were going to sue the company concerned. And I had lots of approaches over those years from a range of people suggesting I don't go ahead with this. It would be a bad idea. To work, I was set on it. I knew what I was doing. And shortly before the court case was due to be heard, the developer changed their mind. Sites were made available, and the city centre development went on. Now, I think that's something that's...
It's a huge success. Yeah.
It was in the Liverpool Echo at the time. And there was actually a front page on it with a picture of the whole thing. And the person, the developer concerned, saying that the Echo made it the headlines, said, speaking to me, "Say it to my face." So I spoke. So that happened. That paved the way. So in a way, it was different to the work I'd been doing, but it's only because I understood how things worked.
Yes.
I was able to do that. And that was, I suppose, using Parliament to investigate when I had reason to believe something would be found from that investigation. So that was one thing that others, but I think for a time I did find it frustrating. I couldn't do it. Another issue arose as well, when I could use my knowledge again in a different way. And it involved the university here, and it involved Liverpool as well, and and Daresbury, big sites, big investment site outside of Liverpool, Cheshire. Liverpool University is involved, so is Manchester, so is Lancashire. And there was a major scientific investment called the synchrotron investment being considered nationally, and it was thought that was going to come to the Daresbury site. And instead, it went to Oxford. There was a massive campaign to change that, which I got involved with. And again, I wasn't leading that campaign because the site wasn't in my constituency. And again, I found that a great frustration.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't in this constituency. Yeah. I'd been used to thinking Lancashire, Northwest, because that's how you get things of this nature.
Yeah.
And I think some of the Liverpool MPs at the time deeply resented my involvement because I kind of knew what I was doing, because a big group together, businesses again, and local authority people, trade unions, voluntary sector, universities. We had a massive campaign. And what had really happened was that I think that Tony Blair, as the Prime Minister, had indicated to the Wellcome Trust that they were going to get what they wanted and it wasn't going to change. But we made such an impact on our campaign that although we lost that, massive investment then followed in Daresbury, and that's why it's so successful now. Yeah. And in fact, I've kept in touch with two of the top scientists at Liverpool University who approached me at the time because they were pleased with the way that the work had gone. And so I think that's an example where I couldn't really do what I wanted. I couldn't run that like I would have done if I'd been in government. But because I understood the nature of the work, I got involved. So we lost it. I think it was irretrievable, but because of the impact we made, a lot came. They're still coming to Daresbury to this day.
Yeah, it's a huge success. Yeah.
But I think it's to do with that. But again, I can perhaps point a bit to what you said about the difference between MP and local government. There were local MPs at that time who were very angry with me because after I got involved in that, maybe I got a bit carried away and I started speaking in Parliament, urging the government to do various things on that Daresbury site. Because that wasn't in my constituency, but it affected the whole area, including that.
Yeah.
And MPs who aren't involved in the work I've been involved in just didn't understand that and didn't like me at all. And I was seen as interfering, although we were all on the same thing. But somehow I couldn't stop because I was geared up to do all. But again, that was again a little lesson because it's different.
Yeah.
And again, although I did that, and I think it had a good result for everyone, I just did register in my mind, I think, constituency.
Yeah.
People don't like it if you start talking about something that's in their patch.
Yeah. I think the other difference, and Graham Stringer, of course, made the same move from leader of Manchester City Council, which again, of course, huge local authority, to Westminster. I've had a couple of conversations with him about this. When you're leader of a council, particularly when it's a big council such as Manchester or Lancashire, you do have a big resource, not just in terms of cash, but also, you've mentioned this a few times in the conversation, the people around you. And of course, what you've managed to do was not only attract talented people who were good in terms of civil servants and public sector people, but those really talented entrepreneurial thinking people in the private sector through enterprises and through the Brussels office. When you become an MP, you go from literally having hundreds of people, a PA, people who are doing the things that on a day-to-day basis, you would just, if there were train tickets to be booked or aeroplane tickets to go to Brooklyn, that was all done for you. You've then gone from that to a staff of it's 3 or 4 people, isn't it, in a constituency office?
It's a massive change, and you're quite right. That's a massive part of it, because you've gone from having basically whatever resources you need to do the job at your disposal, but also people you can talk to, people who know things, know what's going on, and you're the leaders, you're important to them. And so they'll tell you things that are happening to help you to do a better job. And so you're used to it without even thinking about what you're doing. And suddenly you're an MP. Everyone else thinks you've gone up to something much greater and more important, but not like that at all, really. And you've got a constituency, and people want a lot of local work doing. People have issues, individuals, all kinds of complaints, problems to deal with, and you have staff, but limited funds to employ those staff.
Is it 3 or 4 that you have working for you?
And people do it differently. I used to have 2 in London and 2 in... Because I had a very heavy caseload in Liverpool. And I mean, that's an important part of the role as well.
Of course,
because the people have all kinds of problems, and sometimes only MPs can solve them. Or if they think you can solve it, they come to you. And I never turned anyone away. And so I had mounting cases and things to do in Liverpool. And sometimes there was so much they used to pass some of the work to my London staff to do. And so that's what I've had. But you don't have the money to appoint very senior people. So you're appointing people who are mainly full of goodwill. I was very lucky. I always had very good staff. And I'm in touch with some of them now. Even now, after I see you, I'm going to see somebody who used to work for me here. And so it's different. So even if they've got goodwill and knowledge, they're relatively junior people because you've just not got the money to appoint to them. So their knowledge is limited. They do their best, and they can do good research for you to make, say, a speech you want to make. But if you're looking at something broader, you need something else to find out what's going on. And there's a House of Commons library, there are all sorts of things, but nothing actually replaces that access you have as a council, big council leader, to people who know things and can help. I know how frustrated you were because, of course, you and I were meeting at that time. I don't think it was because I was in the room that you were expressing the frustration. I hope it wasn't. And I think that, you're not the only one who said this to me, that, Parliament is, in many respects, for the 21st century, not really fit for purpose. And I think about North West MPs such as yourself. It's a long way to go. You've got 2 homes. You got a family in the North West. Of course, Jeff had his business here, so it's difficult in that regard. And I just think that at some point we've got to look at what is a very antiquated Westminster system and change it. I know some changes did happen, but I still look at it now and look at people queuing up for the lobby. All this sort of nonsense that you've got. I mean, that must have been very strange. And also, I suppose, the other thing that has only just occurred to me, but of course, you were the one who used to tell people the way to vote. When you're down there, you're getting told, aren't you? You get in that lobby on 3-line whip. Oh, very much so. It's the tables that turn.
Yeah.
And so when I was I went for control. Once it was decided, it was going to happen. And, both decided, had any other idea. Suddenly I'm at the other end of the thing. So it's all different. And it's a very different animal. But I did find a role which I won't say bridge the gap, but made me feel I was able to do something, and that was through the Select Committee. And Select Committees are very important.
Hugely important. And you were transport, weren't you, which is a massive area.
I was the chair of the Transport Select Committee. Those are all cross-party working. The majority on each Select Committee reflects the majority party in the government. But they're always mixed. And for most of the time, I was chair of the Transport Committee. There's actually a Conservative government there. So cross-party. And so unless you work in a cross-party manner, you will fail. But I enjoyed it. I followed Lewis Woody, who was MP.
Another formidable woman.
Very formidable woman. Extremely very formidable. And she was MP for Crewe, and she was very formidable. I learned a lot by watching her. I didn't do it exactly the same way. She was more formidable. She had a worse look than me. But fortunately for me, she was very nice with me. And I found through that a way that, I wasn't a minister, I couldn't make things happen, but I could most definitely influence what happened. And we did really important reports because there you're dealing with issues. You identify your own issues. And it's about making things work. It's not about future policy, making something happen now. So we decide which areas needed investigation. For example, one area we looked at was the spiralling costs of motor insurance. And we conducted several investigations into it where, you can call people in front of you, call witnesses in front of you, answer questions, get information, write reports with recommendations. Government doesn't always want to follow those recommendations up, but that's another story. But you can make things happen. On motor insurance, I think certainly for a time, we identified what were really massive scandals, all sorts of people making money in them, solicitors, motors repairers, people that carted your broken down vehicle off the motorway. Often there was a kind of cartel, all getting more money than they should, and the bill going on the motorists. We managed to change a lot of practices there. May have gone back now, some years ago, but we did do something. And we looked into high-speed rail. We looked into local rail services, buses. We argued about the need to bring buses back into local authority control. That's not happened.
It's happened now. Yeah.
Collected the evidence on that. And that took a long time, but we gave it, I think, an extra plus. And we looked at railways and aviation, all kinds of issues, and some of them really very interesting and innovative. And we made changes through that. So I enjoyed that role very much indeed. And I think that somehow was the way I got, not to be a minister, but to influence what Parliament did, whether Labour was or wasn't in government.
And I talk to select committee chairs, past and present, who say to me that they feel as though they've got more power than some cabinet ministers, because even if you're a cabinet minister, depending on your relationship with the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and of course the department you've got, then actually the say that you have can be very limited anyway, can't it? And the other thing that Transport Select Committee was able to allow you to do was not just take up issues that were crucially important, obviously, for the country, but also interesting to yourself. But it allowed you then to utilise those skills that you'd learned as a local government leader, including the media. And, we may come back to this a little later, but one of the things that I'm absolutely shaking my head over at the moment is the poor communication from government ministers. And I wonder whether that is something to do with the lack of experience in terms of local governments and trade unions and so on. But as I say, we may get into that in a moment. So look, you're in Parliament. You've obviously found a role for yourself, and you've got this idea of how you can utilise that position, very different to the one, as you say, as council leader, to still make a difference, to still affect change. And you've given us examples of some of the great things that you're able to do during that period of time. And then, of course, for people like you and I, the disaster happens, and in 2010, I think, was it 10? Ed Miliband becomes leader. That perhaps wasn't as disastrous as it may have been, but I would have preferred David. I don't know about you. But anyway, we go to the next election. Coalition obviously runs from 10 to 15. And then we lose. Ed Miliband steps down as leader, and Corbyn becomes leader of the Labour Party. Now, when that happened, did you think it was going to be as bad as it was? Or were you one of those people who thought, well, give him the benefit of the doubt?
No, I thought it was going to be bad. I thought it would end up in trouble, and I thought it would be bad generally, and I thought it would have a big impact on me personally as well. Generally speaking, I thought it would take politics into a sort of extreme area of promising things that couldn't be delivered, and would be very divisive. I thought that would be a bad thing. But I also had a personal issue as well. I found, by the way, when Jeremy was elected leader, a lot of the MPs, Labour MPs, actually didn't know who he was. Yeah. And a number of people said to me, oh, who's that? And that's because in Parliament, although he'd been there for many years, and it's a very good local MP, he never sought any kind of office or responsibility, and he saw himself as a campaigning MP. So if you were involved in the issues he campaigned on, you most definitely knew he was very, very good at that. But otherwise, he was below the radar and people didn't know. Well, I have come into contact with Jeremy in a number of ways, because one of the areas I've been involved with for a long time was on Middle East issues. And we were on kind of different sides on that, you might say. I mean, I was involved on the sort of Middle East stuff. I supported Israel. I'd always campaigned for Palestinian states as well. I always did that. But Jeremy was more interested in Palestinian stuff. And so any issues to do with that, we both found ourselves at the same debates. And so we knew each other well. It's very, very personable. I once had actually a case with an asylum seeker in Liverpool. I was helping a great deal with a move to Jeremy's constituency, and we worked together on helping this guy. So, we knew each other. But I kind of knew the score.
Yes.
And in Liverpool, I got on very well with people here for over 20 years at the time that I was an MP, working on lots and lots of local issues. But there was always a faction who was deeply antagonistic to me because of my position in relation to the Middle East. And when Jeremy was elected leader, I knew at that moment things would change, not just in the party nationally, but locally as well. And in my very local Labour Party in Liverpool Riverside, the membership increased dramatically from about 500 to 2,700 in a very, very short time. And at the local meetings, which I regularly went to report on my work as an MP, lots of new people, very antagonistic atmosphere. And they stood up in the meeting and actually said, "We've come to get you." So me, I kind of knew him. I was just going to have someone say it, And it was all to do with one issue.
Yes.
Didn't like my stand on one position. Always been a two-state person. Didn't matter to them. And they were not interested in all the other work I did, campaigning for the local hospital, campaigning on transport, working for refugees and asylum seekers. I worked locally and in Parliament on that, all kinds of issues. Weren't interested in one issue. And so what happened was, at the local constituency level, the people who were like that became very unpleasant. There was a Labour Party investigation into it, even when Jeremy was actually the leader, which concluded there'd been anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish prejudice towards me. The local Labour Party wasn't allowed to meet for some time because of that. When it was allowed to meet again, they didn't harass me in the same way they'd done before. They were being watched by them. But I noticed people weren't looking at me in the same way. Door slam. Then it was found there was a campaign to what they called dehumanise me going on. And by then, the Labour Party locally was dominated by people who thought that way. Others that left or kept their heads down or went away. Always a few didn't. Always a few there. And in the end, the situation became tolerable. And I thought, and I had no intention of going actually, but things happened. And in the end, I decided that I couldn't do this anymore.
Yes.
And I felt that I had to expose all this and go on it. And it was the only way I could get the Labour Party changed, which in fact happened.
Yeah.
But it meant that I did leave Parliament.
Yeah. And what a sad end for you personally, because I don't know anybody who you could say is more loyal to the Labour Party, whose service is absolutely impeccable. The huge amount that you've achieved both in local government and Parliament. And then, sadly, you make the decision to walk away. And of course, you weren't the only one, because at that time we had Luciana Berger in Liverpool as well, going through similar things, and other MPs across the country, of course. And then the report on anti-Semitism, which was damning of the Labour Party at that time. And clearly, we don't need to go into this, but, Starmer then sees fit to expel, basically, Jeremy Corbyn and others from the Labour Party because of that. And of course, that then at least allowed you to come back into the party and feel comfortable again.
Yes, on the day that Keir Starmer was elected leader, I can go back a bit. When I left, it was very traumatic for me when I took that.
I can imagine.
And even now talking about it,
Yeah, you can see you're upset.
I'd been a man, 55 years?
Yeah.
When I was 18, that's been my life. But I felt there was no other way to get it changed. I thought it can only get changed if big things happen. The day Keir Starmer was elected leader, he phoned me and he said, I'm going to deal with anti-Semitism, the anti-Jewish hatred here, and I hope you'll feel able to come back. And I said, well, if you do, I will. But I'd always said I'll never join any other party. I'm a Labour person.
Yeah.
Can't be how it is now. And when he did that, it wasn't perfect, but I could see it was changing. And there were still some problems I felt in Liverpool Riverside. But then I thought to myself, I wanted to come back.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, if you're waiting for it all to be right there, 100%, that's never. So forget it, go. So I went back and then I rejoined 2021 at the Labour Party conference. And must say, I rejoined it, all very nice. I've never had that attention before. And I said, well, tomorrow morning it's Keir's making his speech. Will you stay? Come. So I thought, oh, yes. And that's fine. I got a seat on the front row. Well, I must say, in all the many years I've been to Labour Party conferences, I've never had a seat on the front row before, or been treated in that way at all. So I said, oh, yeah. So I sat on the front row. And then, of course, he came on and welcomed me. And a cry of something unpleasant came out. I suspect I know which constituency it came from, but I can't prove it, so I won't say it. But that seemed to do something, and then everyone stood up. And so that was wonderful.
Yeah.
So, yes, I came back.
Yeah.
I'm not going again.
And you're not going away?
I'm not going again. No.
Yeah, I think that you may not necessarily want to comment on this, but in my view, and I would be thanked by our current crop of Liverpool parliamentarians for saying this. But when I think back to that time, people like you, Luciana, Twiggy in West Derby, I think the calibre of MPs that Liverpool had then was far greater than now. And although we are seeing some progress through Liam Robinson's leadership at the City Council, and obviously Steve Rotherham as mayor, I do think that Liverpool is not performing as well in Parliament. As I say, I don't expect you to comment on that, Louise. That's just a personal view, and I'm quite happy to express it. So let's come right up to date then. Obviously, you've had, as I say, that incredible political career. Still very involved in politics and doing things through the likes of the cooperative movement and other things.
I'm doing a few things, but it's not that much really. It's different once you're out and you don't have a platform. It is different. But I'm still doing some things with the Labour Party, and I'm involved with the Board of Deputies of British Jews as well. But again, these are minor things, but I've still got my foot in there.
Well, it's nice to keep your hand in, isn't it? Yes. And we're just past the first year anniversary mark of Keir Starmer's government. Give me your assessment of how you think they're doing.
I think it's a serious government, tackling very important issues that have been neglected many, many years, like the health service, like transport, like housing, things that really matter. But they haven't got a narrative. They're not explaining properly what they're doing, and they're being blown off course, diverted, and they're not getting through to people on the good stuff that they're tackling. They've not solved the problems. There's no way government can solve the problem. And there's a very difficult economic situation going on, and the political problems all around going on. All kinds of issues around, which are very hard to deal with and impossible to resolve. But through all that, they should be able to promote the narrative of what they're actually tackling and actually achieving. And they need to do it, and to do it quickly.
You've got to find a way of telling that story, and you've made it very clear during this conversation that that was one of the key things that you learned as a leader. I know Keir, and you do, and he's very personable. He's good. When you meet him, he's a really lively character. I just don't know how you get him and others within the cabinet to make that transfer to media-friendly personality.
Well, when you're doing the work yourself, your mind is focused on what you are doing. So you need somebody else, unless you're a remarkable person.
Yeah.
And I think Tony Blair was perhaps a one-off.
Yeah.
He could do all of these things. You need somebody else, who you appoint, to guide you to do all that, or they do it, and then, they get you to go along with it. And they tell you, we've written this statement, and you think this should go out today. And you might say no, you might say yeah. But someone else has to tell you, because your mind is focused on the problem. And I'm sure as Prime Minister, I knew as leader, I've been more so as Prime Minister, and you think you're doing something, and then all kinds of issues come to divert you. Some international things happen, it's a headline. Some national things go on. You suddenly hear something about one of your colleagues who you thought was great. You found out something's going wrong, and it might be in the paper and the headline. So all things are going on all the time. So somebody else has to have the job of directing you to do and to say the right things at the right time. No, I cannot understand why they haven't got someone. And I think it needs a modern day Alistair Campbell.
Yeah.
I think at the time he did a great job. I know he was vilified. I know maybe at the end, everyone said it was no good, but he actually did a brilliant job. With a Prime Minister who knew what he was doing as well at the time. And you need someone equivalent to him now. Things have changed since then. The social media now.
Yeah.
Which wasn't as intensive then at all.
Yeah.
And lots of other things have changed. The political landscape is different, much more fragmented now. New parties, on the left and on the right. And that makes it very different as well. So you need a modern day Alistair Campbell who understands the media, has contacts, but understands the message and what to do, and understands what you as a party are trying to do, and it gets that out. Because, back to how I thought in Lancashire, you can be doing good things, but unless people know that, you don't get any credit for it, and they won't vote you in to do it. But they're not going to struggle to work it out. They've got other things to think about. Yeah. So the message has to be there easily. They're not going to look it up.
Right.
Yes. It has to be there. And I think that's where the biggest problem is now. But it's solvable.
Communication.
That might have not solved it.
Yeah. Well, listen, with that great piece of advice for the Prime Minister, we'll end our conversation. It's been brilliant to speak to you this afternoon. We could have done a 10-hour podcast and we still wouldn't have covered all the brilliant things that you've achieved in your career, Louise. So thanks very much for coming into the Downtown Den, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you very much. Such a talking to you, Frank.
Cheers, Louise. And that was Louise Ellman, Dame Louise Ellman, former leader of Lancashire County Council, former Liverpool Riverside MP, and as you've heard this afternoon, a very formidable politician. It's been great to speak to her, and I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to this as much as I did producing it. So thanks to Chris Wilcox, our producer for today's programme, and we'll see you all again very soon. Cheers.